Welcome to the Generation Hustle podcast, a show that explores the world of business, entrepreneurship, and culture, all centered around the millennial. I'm your co-host Sherriston, alongside my good friend Amin, and today we get a chance to speak with Michael Nilevsky, Chief Legal Officer for Yum Brands, the conglomerate that owns and operates the KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut banners. However, before he was a Chief Legal Officer, Mike didn't always know that he would go into law. We hear so many stories of students, graduates, and career professionals alike that feel that they aren't quite in the right field or aren't sure of what they want to do with their careers anymore. How many of us are actually working a job that we truly enjoy and are passionately aligned with? Don't answer that. And more importantly, how many of us are willing to do something about it? In 2006, Mike completed a Bachelor of Life Sciences, fully expecting to enter the medical industry until he realized medical school wasn't what he wanted to do. So after speaking with family and friends, he decided business was the way to go. So he entered an MBA program and graduated in 2008, just as the market crashed, and the industry looked emptier than the tourist spots do in 2020. So after speaking with family and friends again, he applied for law school and graduated from the Osgoode School of Law. At this point, you can say he's the unofficial king of school. Fast forward 10 years and multiple stints at various positions, and he now serves as the Chief Legal Officer at KFC Global and as legal counsel for Pizza Hut International. Mike's story is one of true determination and will. Instead of succumbing to the social norms and accepting an unfulfilling position or allowing external factors to decide his fate, he was able to adjust, pivot, and relearn in order to succeed. In this world, change is the only constant. So if you aren't adapting and learning, you will get left behind. So we talked to Michael about how he maneuvered the many pivots in his career, schooling as it relates to learning and education, and his philosophy on chasing success and passion. We're truly excited for this episode as this conversation is filled with gems throughout that can speak to any age group. So without further ado, Michael Nilevsky. Hello.
What up, gents?
How you doing, Mike?
Hey, nice to see you.
Long time. This is Amin.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, nice to meet you.
How's it going, man?
Good, man. How's quarantine been?
Oh, it's been all right. You're rocking the Canucks hat, eh?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a fan. It's just a nice hat. So, yeah, but I'm not a Leafs fan either, so you can't really call me out for that either.
I should go grab like my Raps hat or my Blue Jays hat.
I was actually going to wear a Raps hat today in kind of celebration of their win. I think it fell on yesterday or something like that. Yeah. So,
I went to the game.
What?
I flew to San Francisco. With my buddies from Toronto. It was crazy. So we were like, I'm obviously living in Texas, and my buddies in Toronto are all, we're watching the games like religiously. And I like wanted to fly home for a game, but it like wasn't working out, and we were getting deeper and deeper in the playoffs. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Philly. Like, it just wasn't lining up with my calendar.
Yeah.
And once we made the finals, I was like, this is ridiculous.
You had to, yeah.
Had to go, yeah.
We just picked a game. We're like, let's just pick, like, early in the series. Like, I think they won game 1, and we're like, okay, let's just buy tickets for game 6. Like, if it happens, it happens. And all my other buddies had tickets in Toronto, or were, like, paying crazy amounts of money for Toronto.
Yeah.
So we just picked one of the games in Golden State. And that week, like the game 5 when we lost, I was in Florida. I had gone to Florida for my job for 48 hours. So I flew in Sunday night. That game was Tuesday night. It ended at like, I don't know, 10:30, 11. I went to my hotel. I booked a ticket. I only booked a one-way ticket to Florida because if we won, I was going to go to Toronto for the celebration. And, and if we lost, I was going to fly. I had to fly home to Dallas. I flew home to Dallas for like 30 hours. Basically dropped my work bag off, saw my kids, saw my wife, packed a new bag, and went to San Francisco. I went to San Fran for 24 hours. Like, I literally flew in the day of the game. Like, my buddies and I, like, all shared one hotel room. We didn't care. We knew we weren't going to, like, really be sleeping there.
Yeah.
And we just went to the game, and obviously we won, and then, like, we partied till super late at night.
Yeah.
And, like, crashed for, like, an hour or two in the morning in the hotel. Woke up, had breakfast, coffee, went to the airport, and flew back to Dallas. Like, it was
That
crazy.
is insane.
That's almost like a hangover story, but not Las Vegas.
Yeah, totally. And
Yeah.
the worst part was, though, is like, I don't know if you ever party on the West Coast, but like everyone goes to bed super early.
No, I've actually never been to Cali, so I wouldn't know that.
Okay. So like the whole West Coast, whether it's Vancouver, Cali, like they're all about waking up early and like going for runs and going to the ocean or whatever. So it wasn't like that good of a party. And the only people partying were like the Canadians. There was probably like a few thousand Canadians there.
Yeah.
So all of us were just like going from club to club. Like every Toronto Raptor fan was like partying together, but we were all like looking at our phones, and Toronto, like the streets were insane, right? Like everyone was piling the streets, climbing on top of buildings. Like it was crazy.
Right. It was insane. I was seeing the videos and I was like, dude, we have to get downtown. Like this is insane.
Yeah. Did you go?
I was there for the parade, or a bit of the parade, but I didn't get a chance to stay for all of it.
Fair enough. Oh, the parade looked insane too. Like I don't know how many millions, 2-3 million people outside. It looked insane.
We were actually, so our work let us go early that day. Like it was like we just came in the office. He's like,
no, I'm even surprised anyone went to work. Like,
he's like, why are you in office? Just go have fun. And so our base, or like our place, actually starts near the lakeshore. Okay. And so that's like when the bus first came in.
Oh, that was the best place to be.
Yeah, that's the best place before all the crazy stuff. And so we got champagne showers from like Kyle. Nice. I still have all the videos and stuff. So nice. Kyle, we had Serge Ibaka, and then Kawhi, obviously. And so that was something to remember. I mean, we're probably never going to see that for a while.
Wow. Who knows?
I mean, we're still defending champs, right?
That's right.
So that's still positive.
That's seriously why I don't want them to restart the season. I'm like, we're still champs, bro. Let us keep it.
Keep it going.
But
I think champions to ever be the champions.
Exactly. But yeah, man, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. We appreciate you so much. I was telling him, and I was like, this dude's story is it's insane, and I loved it. And I remember sitting in your office when you were telling me about it, and I was like, how are you real? Like, what is going on, man?
How did this happen? Yeah. I mean, it's funny, like, everyone has stories in their life. It's not like, it's just sort of the way life unfolded for me. But you always hear like these, I did one thing and something else happened and something else happened. I think even if you ask your parents how they ended up where they ended up, if they've immigrated or moved places, it's always like crazy stories of how these things unfolded. So
yeah.
That's really funny because like my entire family lives in England. But my parents ended up in Canada for some reason. Yeah. I have no clue where, like, how that happened, because like every single family member is in England. I'm just like, that doesn't really correlate or add up. But I'm kind of happy.
They must have had like a friend or a job,
something like that.
Something drew them here, right?
Yeah. But I'm happy. I mean, Canada's probably the best country in the world. Definitely not complaining there.
For sure.
Mike, can you agree with that, or have you fully
a million percent? Couldn't agree more.
I didn't know if you converted fully over.
No, man. I'm still bleeding the red and white. Absolutely.
I love it.
Absolutely. Anyways, yeah. I mean, my story is kind of crazy. Like, I guess I went to undergrad and whatever, thinking that I was going to do sciences and kind of tried to kind of go towards the path of medicine. And, I really spent I kind of spent my time and my focus on writing the MCATs and kind of going the route of where medicine would take me. And for whatever reasons, it didn't really pan out that way. And I guess, I did my undergrad in science, and then I finished undergrad. I had applied to med schools initially, didn't get in. Figured, I should probably go do something else. I'm not just going to sit around and waste a year or waste my time. And I had worked, actually, my sister was working at Johnson & Johnson. So I went and worked there for a summer as a summer intern or whatever. They had opportunities for, family and whatever.
Yeah.
And I sort of got involved in the pharmaceutical industry and decided I was going to go do an MBA, and figured the McMaster, the program, has a really good co-op program, their MBA program, and it's linked to health sciences. So right. I kind of liked health sciences, always kind of had a passion for business. So thought that would be a good way to kind of see the business side of it. Right. So I did basically an MBA at Mac, spent, in the beginning I was I'm going to do the health sciences MBA. That was my focus. I applied into that program. I got into that program. And the way that program works, actually, so it's 4 months school, 4 months work. and you're constantly rotating between the two for like 2.5 years. And in my about a year into it, so I had done a work semester, a school semester, a work semester, and then a school semester. And I just started realizing, like, I'm getting an MBA. Why am I limiting myself to healthcare? Like, there's so many other industries. I should probably learn something about finance if I'm going to, pretend that I have an MBA. I should understand what that means. So I ended up working at a mutual fund company called Mackenzie Financial.
Yep.
And then I went back to Mac again. I did a consulting stint at a hospital and then worked for another pharma company. Anyways, things kind of just unfolded themselves. And then I was graduating business school and it was 2008.
Yep.
And basically, I had actually reapplied to med school thinking maybe I was going to go. It again didn't really pan out. This was a year earlier. I kind of decided that wasn't for me anyways. And thought, okay, I'll work, I'll get out of business school, I'll find a job, there's good jobs out of business school, I'll figure something out.
Yeah.
And it was 2008 when I got to business school.
Yeah.
And literally the whole entire world economy was just crashing, right?
Yeah.
Not different than what it is like today. And so I actually was kind of interviewing with a company and potentially had a pharma kind of job lined up, but decided that, it wasn't really my passion. I could have done it and I would have, it would have been fine, but I wasn't really passionate about it. And actually a bunch of my friends ended up going to law school at the time. And they're like, listen, you have an MBA, go get a law degree. And they're like, if you combine the two, you'll have so many doors that'll be open for you. You can go on the business side, you can do the legal side. It's a really good combo. And so, I did think about it pretty seriously. And actually my wife at the time was like, listen, when are you going to have another opportunity like this? We were still dating at the time, but we weren't ready to have kids or anything. We weren't getting married yet. And she kind of pushed me. She's like, listen, go and see what, if you're interested in a law degree or whatever. So anyway, I obviously applied to law school, got into law school. And the joke about all my friends is I've written the MCAT, the LSAT, I've written
every standardized test. Yeah.
I think I became a standardized test whiz or something. Anyways, so I went to law school, and then what actually worked out for me really well was law school, and we can get into this a little bit later in the conversation, is very structured, kind of how you get jobs and recruitment and all that. And when it was time for jobs and recruiting and applying for positions, I thankfully, I actually had a real resume because it opened a lot of doors for me when I was interviewing at all these firms. The thing I kept hearing about from every person that I was meeting with was this is a real resume. Most people who go to law school, let's be honest, are coming out of undergrad or had worked for a year somewhere, but don't have real life work experience. And that was kind of one of the things that I would think put me, head above shoulders above other people. There's obviously a few older people that kind of go back to school, and those are the people that obviously have real careers and then kind of go to law school. And those people obviously have real resumes, but most of the people are just kids from undergrad, and they've worked at their mom's company or their dad's company for a summer, and they worked at a summer camp and did whatever odd and end jobs. And there's nothing wrong with odd and end jobs. I think they're fine, but it let me stand out the fact that I actually had a real resume that was made up of pharma companies and financial industry and, healthcare and consulting and whatever the different things that I had done. And I think one of the things I always tell friends or parents, friends that are oh, can you talk to my kid about, career and kind of how you ended up in things? I always say to them, don't think of yourself as a kid when you're kind of going through school. Really try and figure out, go see what your dad's friend does that you think does something interesting, or your mom's friend, or if your sister works somewhere, go see what that's about. You kind of hear the stories and you kind of feel what they do, but until you kind of go to their office day to day and kind of get a feel for that, you're never really going to know what that's like, right?
Right.
So I think that's always something that I kind of encourage people to do. And, and I think kids kind of take it for granted. They don't realize that those opportunities exist. They think, oh, eventually I'll get a job. But if you actually spend the time and you're not really building a resume, you're just kind of learning and you're getting that experience, you sort of start to map yourself out and figure out where your career can go, right?
Right. So and that's an interesting point. I like that you mentioned that, because what I wanted to ask during that process was that Did any of this seem like scripted to you at all? Like, did you ever see this as a kid? Just because as a kid, you're always asked that question, right? So it's like, did you ever have that idea like, hey, this is what I want to do, or maybe I'll try this?
Yeah, and not at all, right? And I think first of all, like a lot of kids, you know, kind of how do you end up doing what you do, right? Like how do you end up studying what you study? A lot of it's like your parents' influence or like, you know, your family's influence. You have a history of like, you know, I don't know, doctors in your family, or you have a history of whatever family business that kind of has been running for years or whatever. So I think that kind of pushes people, or like TV often, right? You like a lot of times kids in law school are like, I love Law and Order, and that's why I wanted to be a lawyer. Or, you know, they do say that, and but it's legitimate. Like, that's okay. You can like wanting to be a lawyer because you watched it on TV, or a doctor or a policeman or whatever. That's kind of how we experience the world, right?
Everyone wants to be Harvey Specter, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, I never watched that show till after I like finished law school. I should have probably watched it sooner. But I think, you know, I don't think there is a script to it. And I think a lot of, you know, young people often think that, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that. And that does work out for a few people. And that's, you know, the right path to have. I think you should kind of have goals and try to set them and achieve them. But I would say if you probably, you know, poll 100 people, I'd say 80 of them are not doing the things they thought they would be doing, whether that's in school or high school or undergrad, or even if they have a degree, like they're not often doing what their degree or specialty is, right? And it's all kinds of circumstances, whether they hated it or they never got a job in it, or other opportunities came up along the way, or they tried it out for a few years. So I would say, you know, be open to like see kind of the path that life takes you on, and try and figure things out, and kind of trust your gut a little bit. And sometimes you have to take a leap of faith too, right? Like it's not an easy thing to switch careers or to go back to school. And a lot of those things also depend on your circumstances and your financial situation. And, you know, there's a lot of factors at play. But I think if you try to kind of, you know, be open about it and see what opportunities, and kind of jump sometimes when they feel right and as they come, you know, or look for them, you know, is the other way of doing it. And don't just expect things to unfold the way you plan them to, kind of thing.
Right. And you said it like right there, right? You got to take a leap of faith. So it's like during your process, at least, like when you were switching between all these different fields, it's like it's easy to say that, but when you're in it, it's kind of like you're confused, you're angry, you're upset, like you don't know what you're doing. Like,
originally when I like didn't get into med school after undergrad, I was not devastated, but I was pretty upset. I was like, oh, I'll go do an MBA. I thought I was just going to do an MBA to kind of kill time while I would like, you know, write the MCAT again and kind of, you know, pick my grades up. And if you had a master's, you were more likely to get into med school. So I kind of like did it as a thing, not really thinking this was going to take me anywhere else, but it ended up being something that did take me somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, like going through it, yeah, you have all the emotions of like, is this the right thing? Is, you know, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Like,
yeah.
You know, what did I just do? And like, I even considered at some point, like going to med school in the Caribbean, because I was like so passionate about being a doctor, and like, it's so hard to get in Canada. And, you know, I had some friends that were like either going to the Caribbean or were already there or had just finished there. And I think, you know, I actually like went to one of like the Caribbean med schools, like open houses at some point. And then I was like, this is crazy. I'm not going to go like, you know, anyway, it didn't feel right for me. Right.
Yeah.
But, you know, had I chosen that path, who knows where I'd be today. So
yeah. Who knows? Right.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? When you have all these forks in the road, you're not always going to make the right choices. I definitely made lots of, you know, mistakes and whatever along the way, but that's sort of how life pans out. And I think that's what keeps it interesting, right?
What was the self-talk that you kind of gave yourself during those forks? Because I think that's the hardest thing for people, right? Yeah. You always want to know that you're making the right decision, but you never do until 10 years, 15 years down the road.
It's funny. I mean, I just moved from Canada to the US like a year and a half ago, and I'm still talking to myself.
Hey, it's gotten you there, so you got to trust it.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I don't know, right? Like, I think part of it has to do with probably like my parents, and like they actually were born in Moldova, and like, which used to be part of the USSR, and then like immigrated to Israel and like jumped as an opportunity to get out of like communist Russia and like escape. And then my aunts had moved to Canada and they're like, let's leave Israel and go to Canada. Like, it seems like there's better opportunities there, right? And I feel like that's my childhood. So like I was born in Israel and I moved to Canada very young, but those are the stories I always heard from my own parents. Right. And I think they were always just like, you got to keep going. You got to do the next thing. Like, there's no time for self-pity and there's no time to like stop and think about things. I mean, you should think things through, but you know, you can't like dwell on what didn't happen. You just got to like make your way, keep going and make your own way work for you, whatever that way is.
Right.
And I think that's probably what has kept me going throughout all the craziness. Even now, like even in COVID and the craziness of the world, like you can't, there's no time for self-pity and for, obviously times are tough and people are sick and there's all kinds of situations coming out of it. But I still think it's just important to, just keep chugging along and keep pushing. And sometimes it is a bit of rolling the dice. I think we all know, like, part of life is just being lucky at the right times. And that's a huge part of it. And I don't think anyone can deny that. But part of it is also just hard work. Like, you got to work really hard. And if one thing doesn't work out, like, don't be afraid to jump in on something else and work hard at that and see where it goes.
Right. I want to ask you a quick question on that. Like, how do you, because it just came to my mind right now, just because it's one thing to kind of push yourself to go through different things and just tell yourself that, like, hey, we got to keep pushing it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But how do you, what is your view on failures, right? Because I think that perspective is really key for people to understand how to bounce back in situations. And you bounce back a lot, or I don't even want to say bounce back. I just want to say you pivoted a lot.
Yeah.
Right. So like, how do you view that?
I think anyone who's like failed at the thing they thought they were going to achieve and then ended up doing something different, I think anyone will tell you like the obvious, if you fail, you got to get up and go again. But I don't necessarily like think it's that. I actually think it's, life or God or, karma or whatever you want to call it,
right.
Kind of pointing you in a different direction, right? Like, to be honest, like I look at my friend, I have a few friends now that are physicians, and like, I'm not sure that I would have been a good physician or that would have been the right lifestyle for me. Like, and I wouldn't have known that until now. And I'm not that old that I'm looking back in my whole life, but maybe that wasn't the right or what was meant for me to be like in my career. And I would have never known that at the time. There's no way to know that at the time. And you can only be in the life that you're in. But I think that instead of looking at it as a failure, trying to think of, well, this didn't work out, try and figure out what's something better that you can do, right? And what's something different that you can do that will lead you down an equally successful or more successful road for whatever success means to you, right?
Right.
Whether it's
one day
school,
at a time.
Yeah. And even if it's like school, even just, did I get into the university that I wanted to go to? Did I get into the class I wanted to get into? All sort of the steps that, you go through in your schooling life and then eventually in your career. Like, if it was meant to be, it'll sort of happen. And if it wasn't meant to be, it probably for the right reasons wasn't meant to be.
Right.
I think that's super powerful because that could pretty much resonates to me, because I remember when I was applying to universities in high school, my number one choice happened to be Schulich at York. And so my other choices were like Laurier or Mac and stuff like that. And I think one of my buddies got in, and I was just like, hey, where's my acceptance? I haven't gotten yet. Granted, I thought I had the grades and did everything I could.
Right.
A week later, I figure out, shit, I didn't get accepted. And like that was kind of like, it impacted me in a way where it's just like, damn, I didn't get my first choice. But then I had the opportunity of going to Laurier.
Right.
And it's probably the best decision I've ever made since. And so like, I never kind of look back on that kind of experience of like, I didn't get into Schulich, but you just move forward and, like you said, life is just what it is. And, you have to kind of move forward with whatever decisions or outcomes occur.
For sure. And you know what? Like, maybe Schulich wasn't meant for you, right? Like, maybe you would have struggled there. Maybe it wasn't the right opportunity. Maybe because you went to Laurier, you moved out of your house and you like had a great undergrad experience that you wouldn't have had living at home, going to York. Like, who knows, right? Maybe you met your wife, whatever. I don't know what else happened in your life, but those kinds of things, weren't meant to be for whatever reason, for whatever those reasons are. So you're absolutely right. Like but I think what separates, people is how you react to that situation, right? A lot of people are like, oh, I didn't get into Schulich. My life is going to be ruined. I'm not going to get that prestigious job that comes out after I go to Schulich, and then I'm not going to be successful. And they kind of get stuck in those moments. And I think those are the moments that you kind of, like you said, you just have to say, okay, it didn't work out. I can go to Laurier and kill it there and get a great job out of there. And maybe I'm the smartest person there, and I'm, whatever. And I'm going to work twice as hard so that I can get an MBA at Schulich or whatever.
Right.
And you kind of push yourself versus getting down on life and being like, okay, and trying to always go back. People do all kinds of crazy things.
Right. Yeah.
Try to go back to the other path when sometimes it's not the right thing for you.
I think this is a question kind of for both of you guys, just on that note, like, and I mean, you mentioned that you get to look back now and say, hey, like, I'm happy with where I am. And that was because of Laurier. So was there ever a moment during the process where you were like whether that was you at Laurier or Mike while you were in law school, like, was there ever a moment where you were like, this is it, like, I have a feeling that this is it and this is going to do well? Or was it always like after the fact where you got a chance to look back?
Mike, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, for me, I would say the first time maybe that I never looked back at all. I would say the first time that maybe I felt like this was for me and kind of being successful was kind of in law school. I think once I kind of went through the way law school works, I won't get into all the details, but basically you kind of, if you want to work in the corporate world, all the big firms and medium-sized firms and even some of the criminal firms and whatever, depends on kind of what kind of lawyer you want to be. But if you want to do the commercial corporate stuff, they all hire you, well, not all, they hire you pretty much out of or in the middle of second year, but it's all based on like your first year marks and kind of, first year and a half kind of marks.
Right.
And so I think for me, when I finally kind of went through the recruitment process and had a job, it kind of gives you a little bit of security because you kind of have a summer position. And if you do okay in summer or you do well in summer, that'll sort of lead to an articling position, which will eventually allow you to be a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think that's like the stress you have when you go to law school because you're like, I don't want to go through this whole process, not get an articling position, not become the lawyer. Like, what did I spend all these years studying in and not ever becoming that? And that's not the route that everyone takes, and that's not necessarily how it works out. But for me, that's what I wanted to do. And once I kind of had that, summer position lined up and felt like, I'd be fine there. And if I did okay, I'd be able to succeed there. That's kind of the first time that I really felt like I was leading in a path that was like meant to kind of be. And until that point in my life, I never really felt that way, to be honest, which is, I'm only saying this now, like I never really thought about it till looking back. So to answer that point, but in looking back, I can now feel like that's when I started to kind of feel a little bit more relaxed that like my university or schooling was kind of leading somewhere with a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
What about you, Armin?
For me personally, I think undergrad's a weird space to be in. I think you're too young at that point to really realize where you're going to head or where it's going to end up. So, I mean, obviously taking like the accounting degree, accounting major, I kind of knew what stream I wanted to go into, but never knew what industry I'd end up in. So I obviously started out in public accounting, which was, the typical route, similar to, say, in law school, you have to do articling for some type of law industry that like criminal law or whatever it may be. In this case, I just ended up in a tax role out of school, which because my grades happened to be pretty good in tax class. So one of the partners were like, you know what, we have a role in tax, might as well just shift into that. And I had no expectations of doing that, to be honest. Yeah. And so I think it actually really did set me up because moving into tech per se, because in the field of tax, you kind of have to really be a problem solver rather than just follow a real structured format similar to what an audit has to do. And so I kept on kind of taking the roles where I had to take problem solving. And I think I took a few courses in university where I was allowed to excel at that. And so that's kind of maybe that inkling of where I wanted to kind of pursue that area, but I didn't know where I was going to end up. And so it's kind of hard to say in my undergrad that I really knew where I was going to head out. Right. And so I think later in my years, as I progressed, that's kind of where I realized where my passions were. And now it's just like more so focused in, say, the tech industry and specific like finance and strategy is what I'm passionate about. And so I keep on kind of pushing towards, those kind of parameters. So I think it's a unique kind of way of looking at things, but I think it's really hard to kind of determine when you're young where you're going to end up.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about school, and I've been thinking about this or talking about it recently, is like the courses you generally do well in, like either you do well in like the maths or the sciences, like there's a group of things, but it's the skills that you're kind of, you don't know, people tell you you're learning skills, but you don't think about it that way. Or you're just like, oh, I'm learning calculus or algebra or whatever you're learning.
Right.
But when you get to like working, whatever that means, those are the things that you're more comfortable doing. And so you kind of naturally make decisions to kind of take those kinds of jobs and opportunities, or those things become present to you because you are good at those things. And you're like, yeah, I would, if you're good at math, as an example, you're not going to want to take a job where you're like writing a lot, right? Or you're not comfortable. That's not what your passion is, but you like crunching numbers, or you understand numbers better and you feel comfortable with them. So it's going to lead you to that kind of path, right? And that's not always the case. And lots of people can do all kinds of different things, but, and that's sort of, even in your own, there's the way you were telling that story, like that made sense that you would do like a problem solving type of gig. And then as gigs came up that you were excited about, they were the ones that weren't just like straight following rules. They were ones that kind of made you problem solve or think things through that were outside of the box, right?
Yeah, exactly it.
I think people get too attached to symbols or ideals, right? It's kind of like, I want to be a doctor, and then you kind of force yourself to go down that. So it's like, because I've always wanted to be a doctor, I always want to do this. And this is not particularly you. Like, I actually wanted to go into medicine as well, and I switched completely to business midway through high school, because I was like, what am I doing? Like, why am I trying to force this persona onto myself, right? Sure. And people, it was so hard to admit. So I think that was why your story resonated so well, because you were just like, okay, all right, let's go to the next one.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Like, there was no friction at all.
I thought, like, it seems like that, right? In reality, there was friction, and there was, decision making, and there was, part of it was like, oh, I'm good at these like tests. I can write another test and go to another school, and I don't need to go to work. I can do school for another few years. And it always seemed like a natural, I don't know if it seemed natural or it ended up being that way, but it felt comfortable to me at the time. Like, I don't think, like I said, I could have taken other jobs and it probably would have been okay, but didn't feel like that was the right route for me.
Right. So you started feeling right around the time you started working in law.
And I think, exactly. So I think, I got out of law school, and I had an articling position at the firm that I had worked at in the summertime, and I articled there, and then, got offered a job to come back as an associate, and, kind of thought that was, where life was going to take me, and I would be an associate for a bunch of years, and who knows, maybe make partner one day, or like try and make partner at a firm somewhere. And I started kind of down that path, and the same sort of thing happened in my life, right? Like, I got married, my wife and I started thinking about having a family. And then, a couple of years later, my daughter was born. And at the time, I was still like, I was a young associate at a law firm, at a big corporate law firm in Toronto, who, traditionally you're working a lot of hours and a lot of late nights. And it just became like apparent to me that at that point in my life, that wasn't something that like I want, it probably like couldn't even handle. The reality is, like, it was a lot of stress from like late nights and, not sleeping and all the things that come with having a newborn in the house.
Right.
And not to say that like the law firm wasn't supportive and all that. I think they were. It's just the reality of the business. And you hear this a lot. Often, like, the female lawyers feel a lot of the brunt because even though they take time off, they feel like, it's really hard to get back into like the legal, profession when you're in a firm and you have young kids or whatever. But like, you know, as a dad, I was really into my kids and I wanted to like be a part of their lives. And I could have stayed in law. It wasn't like, you know, it wasn't impossible. It just didn't, it became, there was a lot of friction. And so, and just the way things work out as they often have in my life, you know, I was, the place that I'm at now, which is Yum Brands, they were a client of the firm that I was working at. Oh. And for about a year and a half, you know, even before I had a kid, I was like one of the associates on the file and was kind of, a lot of stuff was going on in their business in Canada. And so there was just a lot of work that I was involved in their business. And over the year and a half before I even moved there, you know, I had been to their offices and like been on phone calls with different people in different departments. And so, and I'll get to how I ended up there, but eventually when I did kind of go work there, and even to today, I always tell people, like, I've been working there for almost 5 years now. It feels like 6.5, because the first year and a half, I was like sort of a consultant from the legal side to the company. And when I walked in the door on the first day, I had no, you know, I had names, or I had met some of like 10 or 12 people out of a company of like 100. It's like I knew 10 to 15% before I walked in the door, just by being on calls with them and kind of helping them and dealing with them. So it felt very natural for me to kind of go there. And again, some of it's the stars lining up and, you know, the perfect path happening for me. But right around the time when my daughter was born, their business, you know, something interesting happened in their business, and they hadn't had like a full-time in-house lawyer for their Canadian business for quite some time. There was one prior, but it was been a few years, and they were being supported out of Dallas. Interesting, where I am today. They had a lawyer who was kind of flying in and out of the country and would fly in every 4 weeks or so and kind of help out and do some stuff remotely. But, you know, their business was picking up and things were happening, and it became apparent that they needed a lawyer. And so again, with the stars lining up, or fortuitously, this all happened like within a month of after my daughter was born. And so, you know, I had like a meeting with them on completely something else. And then they, you know, we sort of started talking, and it was very mutual. Like it was like, hey, like, is there an opportunity here? How do you feel about coming here? Like both parties were kind of very open to it. And actually I was interviewing somewhere else at the time. There was like a tech position actually that had come up, and, you know, the tech world, you know, this is now 5 years ago, but especially in Toronto, was like starting to boom, and a lot of my friends were kind of going into that industry. And even I was like, oh, should I go into this tech field? Like it seems, you know, like that's where society's going. But actually, like the decision to go to Yum, I sort of took a leap of faith, and they sort of took a leap of faith on me, even though we had known each other for a year and a half. But it felt like the right place for me, and was probably, again, one of those times where I acted on feelings and took, you know, a job that I felt was going to be like right for me. And it's one of those places, obviously now I worked in Canada for 3 years, and now I've been in the US with them for 2 years. You know, it's obviously been the right move for me. It's been a company where I've really loved and felt like home, and their culture has been amazing and has lined up well for me. And kind of to your point earlier, I'm on about like how you feel, you know, the jobs you take and the things you do that make you feel comfortable. Like it's worked out for me in a way that's made me feel comfortable. And I think part of the reason people succeed at certain jobs or in certain companies or in certain industries, or if they start their own company or whatever, it's that like, that's what they're comfortable doing. Right. And you succeed when you're comfortable. So I think that's, you know, we can get into that as well, but that's sort of how I ended up here. Is like, I didn't think I would be here. If you asked me even 5 years ago, I thought, I'd go do this Yum job for a couple of years and then something else would appear and I would do that. But that hasn't been the case. And so it's been awesome for me, at least, to kind of grow the company and, you know, especially in the last 5 years, the company's really been doing well, and it's been like fun to be a part of the growth and all the excitement that's been happening.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that like that kind of progression and kind of your decision making around that is almost like a movie. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Starring Mike, we should just get like a Steven Spielberg thing going on or something like that.
I know,
eh? So Mike,
Harrison should be the director.
Yeah.
I'll do my best.
That's the next thing for you after podcast, man. You can direct movies.
I'm putting it out in the universe now, man. You said it, and I'm making it happen.
There you go.
So Mike, now that you've kind of established your way through law school, there's a lot of individuals, the new generation coming into law school. And one of the objections, I've heard this many times, is I think it's specifically in Canada. I'm not sure if it's in the US as well, but you have to complete your full undergraduate degree before you enter law school. Yeah. And in some countries, all you do is require your completion of your LLBs, for example, like the UK. And so we've seen a lot of students flock towards, say, Australia, the UK, and stuff like that. In your opinion, do you think this is kind of the right approach in terms of law school, like the undergrad and then the LLB? Or do you think having a structured program, like a 4-year program, as just an LLB is the right path to go and saving a couple years in terms of your path?
Yeah, it's funny, like, you know, even thinking back to like when I wanted to go to med school and potentially going to the Caribbean, like some people I think you can go to the Caribbean after like 2 years of undergrad or something like that. You don't need to finish a full undergrad to go. And I think some people try to go right away because obviously it like takes a long time and there's a lot of years of school. And if they can shave a couple of years off, then why not do it, right? And I think there are countries that have that like position. Obviously Canada and the US are not in that group. I'm not sure that there's like a right or wrong way. I do think part of it is actually like being mature enough to understand what like working in a company is and advising, like, you know, when you become a lawyer, at least on like the corporate side, you know, you're advising like businesses and they're really looking for you to like give them advice. And it's not just necessarily that they're going to be either worried about a lawsuit. That's obviously part of it, but some of it, you know, lawyers play like a unique role. Part of it, it's born out of the legal side of things, but they play a role, just, you know, the good ones at least, they are looked to for like real strategic business advice within the confines of the law and understanding the law and kind of understanding where and what they can do. And so I think part of it is just having life experience and your age. And I'm not saying that young people can't be good lawyers. For sure they can. And I think older people can be bad lawyers. Like, it's not only that. But I think part of it is kind of living through undergrad, like even to the point you made earlier, is like when you go through undergrad, you don't really know. Yeah. You're also, you know, you're in your late teens or early 20s and you're kind of just finding yourself as a human. You know, there's relationships and life and family and, you know, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever. I think all those things that kind of happen to you in those stages of your life that kind of help shape you as a person. And I think going to, even for me, like, going to business school and then law school, like the fact that I had worked in businesses, it wasn't just the fact that that was a resume builder. It was the fact that when I was now on the legal side of things, talking to people in a company, I kind of understood what their pressures were of being in a company, what makes a company successful. Like having walked, again, I did a bunch of co-ops. There were 4-month stints at different places. I wasn't spending years in companies, but understanding that like the division they're in might have certain bonuses and targets, and understanding that they have financial restraints, and understanding like what their shareholders, like what their role they play, just even understanding like the stakeholders within a business. When you're on the legal side and advising a company, the more you can understand that, the better advice you're going to give. And I don't know that necessarily, and again, if you're smart and you're young and you're in tune to all these things, I think you could be super successful. And I don't necessarily think you need the undergrad. It's not like anyone who's finished any kind of degree, look, nurses and engineers go right to undergrad and become professionals. They don't need to go any extra schooling. I just think that if you do have, the more experience you have, I think the better you'll be. But I'm not sure that there's like a perfect answer. I think it works either way. But I do think there's something to the fact that you've worked and experienced life a little bit, particularly for law, that you can be a better advisor to people. And then whether that's criminal charges on the criminal case, or litigation, or corporate law, or environmental law, like just having those experiences help shape you and ground you a little bit in reality of businesses and life and the people that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that point, because I kind of give the example of my CPA designation in terms of, you know, trying to relate back to you guys are doing your law degree and getting your designation. And in terms of the process we go through, we obviously go through the 4-year undergrad, which has to be like an approved program. And then there's other kind of courses you have to take after school. Granted, they don't take 2 years in time, generally speaking, but there is a added kind of subset of material that you have to take to kind of advance your knowledge in specific areas. And I think that's kind of where maybe our Canadian system is kind of taking their stand on that. Is like maybe you're probably not going to be a great 20-year-old lawyer or whatever it may be, right? That's way too young to kind of make large decisions. I mean, you might be a genius, but still you're very inexperienced. And so I kind of always try to give that contrast between the designation I have and what you're kind of trying to achieve. It's like, you get better with experience, just like you age like a fine wine kind of thing. That's kind of the analogy I always give.
For sure. And like people always say, actually, I have 2 points on that. One is the law firm that I worked at actually had done a study, I think when I started there, of like their successful partners, and they went back and looked at their grades in law school, and they, you would have assumed that they were all the A students, but actually there was a complete, there were guys that were in the C's and the B's, and some were the A's. Like it was a whole spectrum. And I think and again, goes back to like life experiences and all these other things that happen. It's not just about the schooling part of it and getting, because you got 100 and whatever constitutional law does not make you a good constitutional lawyer.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, that was my one point. And the other one was, I think like Canada takes a stance on these things, and it's more like, part of it is like there's a funnel for schooling, and like you have to be, they want sort of diversity within what people come out as, and they need some lawyers and they need some doctors, but they need some engineers, they need some nurses, they need policemen, they need everything across the board. So I think part of it, what's interesting about Canada is there's only like 35 million people, but we have, a large geographic area. We have all kinds of industries and all kinds of jobs. And like schooling traditionally is only part of the system, and they kind of want to funnel people into other things. Like, I never knew anything about mining, as an example, right? Or like, but actually when I started working at a law firm, like mining is a huge thing in Canada, and the TSX or whatever, the TMX we want to call it, mining is a huge industry in Canada. Why aren't they like exposing young people to that? Like, why aren't they teaching them about gemology? And, there's so many interesting things that are happening across Canada, energy industry, like there's so many cool and unique things. But I think it's like, the bubbles of school kind of funnel you into these, specific professions that, the younger generations aren't often exposed to all the other exciting things that are happening. And I actually think it's sad. Like you kind of, you realize this later, but had I known about whatever when I was a kid, maybe that would have excited me. I don't know.
100% agree with that. 100% agree with that. I feel like, I don't know, this is probably blowing up on social media now with a lot of influencers talking about how they made millions without school and stuff like that. But realistically, having went through that, it's like schooling is very focused on a certain set of standards, right? And it's like, it doesn't necessarily define you for what you can become. So I feel like it can have a silo effect where it kind of forces you down one way, and then that's where you kind of conform to a big mess, and it's like you don't have the individuality to you until you kind of branch out from that. So
yeah, and again, it's like your experiences as a kid and like what your parents do and what their friends do. Like if you have a friend who's a real estate agent and they're very successful, you're like, oh, I want to go do real estate, right? Like there's 1 million real estate agents in Canada. Like everyone wants to be a real estate agent.
Yep.
The real estate market was so hot. Like, everyone's brother and sister is a real estate agent now.
Yeah.
But why aren't they looking at all the other millions of industries that exist, right?
Right.
So, and again, maybe if you live in Alberta, like you think of oil and gas as a real industry, but if you're in Ontario, it doesn't, there's nowhere to learn about it. There's nowhere to kind of get involved in it. I remember when the oil boom was happening and like everyone was moving out to Calgary, and like all these kids were driving like Porsche. I think they said Porsche or Lamborghini. One of these places said that like one of their best retail locations was in Calgary,
right?
Because all these kids were like making 6 figures. They were like not even going to school. They were just going to like be truck drivers or whatever, and were making like really good money in the oil sands. And what do you need when you're young? Like you just want a cool car and a cell phone, right? Like so they were all buying like Porsches and Lambos and like and so it's funny. It's just like what's happening in your country, what's happening in your economy, what's happening in society at the time. Like, maybe I should have been an influencer. Geez, I probably would be making 5 times the money I'm making now.
It's never too late for that. I'll tell you that.
If I could just open and unwrap gifts properly, I could be like that Ryan kid.
Oh, that kid is killing YouTube, man.
Oh, like, my 5-year-old wants to watch him open presents. I'm like, why are you watching this kid?
I know Aman has a question here, but I just want to get that point in. That was a beautiful example, because just relating school and influencers and making money and understanding the economy. It's like, when I first learned that kid, like found out about that kid, I was like, he's making $2 million a year opening.
No, not 2 million, like 20 million.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I think it's like 40 now. This kid.
Yeah, this.
Man.
Yeah,
well,
this is probably
parents are probably killing it. I don't know about him yet, but
yeah, this is probably at the time he was making 2 a year, and I was like, and I'm paying $40,000 a year to get a piece of paper. Like, what is like, you know what I mean? So that was the first time I was like, there's something backwards about this.
For sure. And like, come on, all the Instagram, this and that, like, but the thing is, it's real. This is the crazy part of it, right? Is like, we can sit here and laugh about it, but the reality is there's so many people making money this way, and not, and that's become an industry. Like, that they think that this is the career that they want to do. And maybe it's not a lifetime career, but maybe it doesn't need to be. Like, if you made a few mil, like a couple of years doing it, that's all you maybe need to work for the next 10, 15 years of your life. Yeah.
I guess it all depends on the person. So I think this is a perfect segue into the next question. We talked about testing, and Mike, you've taken all sorts of standardized tests. So I think you're a perfect one to answer this question. But including myself, like, I didn't really perform too well on standardized testing. Luckily, I passed my CPA and I have my CPA, but Sherston chime in on after this. But do you think the LSAT is a good indicator of an individual becoming successful in the field of law, or any standardized test for that matter? And do you think there's a better alternative out there for testing?
I think that, I understand why, like, schools do it. And I probably, before you get into a program, you might not understand it. And, like, you're frustrated by the results, or even if you do very well, you're like so happy because, and you think it means something. I think any school, any profession will tell you, no one ever looks back at those, marks, grades, whatever. And I would say that I doubt there's a correlation between you being a good doctor and you being good at the MCAT, or you being a good lawyer and you being good at the LSAT. I don't think those things are relevant. They're relevant, but I don't think that there's maybe a correlation, but I don't think there's a causation or whatever, right? Like, I don't think one thing leads to the other. I think if you're a school and you have, like, however, how many kids apply to law schools or med schools in a year, like thousands and thousands and thousands, and you only have like 200 spots to fill or whatever, if you're a school, how do you do that, right? And so even of the 10,000 kids applying, 5,000 of them are straight A students. And so you kind of have to start dwindling people down some way or another. And I think that's like where the whole standardized testing started. The reality is now that, like, even the test itself and all that has become such a big industry, right? Where like, and there's like so many schools and, like, all these different books and, like, and ultimately, I do think it tests, like, how you think and how your brain can compute, and how you, even reading and writing skills. There's math involved, obviously, problem solving. They all kind of test the same skill sets in different ways. And, some of them are more based in some learning and some education that you may need, like the MCATs, for example. You have to sort of have some basic chemistry and biology and whatever to understand and do well on them. But, like, it's always bothered me that you always hear these people who, like, they can write any of the tests because they're just, like, so good at standardized testing. And when I say I'm good at standardized testing, I'm okay. I'm not like one of those people who just go and write a standardized test. I still studied and I still, did all these things. I never mentioned the GMAT, by the way, but you have to write the GMAT.
But anyway, business schools, but okay.
Yeah, I forgot about the GMAT, to be honest. But anyways, I do think it does test some sort of cognitive abilities, right? And I think, does it matter that you got 10 points higher than the guy sitting beside you? I don't think that matters. There's a lot of it, how you take tests. A lot of it's like, people feel a lot of pressure being in a room with, like, a tester and however the test is administered, like that in and of itself is a lot of pressure for people. But interestingly, it's just really preparing you for like dealing with pressure and how you deal under pressure. So I think getting good at writing those tests kind of is important to as a skill in and of itself, right? And that's the part that people kind of overlook. And like, you know, if you're not good at writing a test under that kind of pressure, you're never going to be good in law school, because all you do in law school, well, not all, but half the tests you write in law school are sitting in a room with 50 or 60 other people in a 3-hour time crunch window, you know, reading and writing. And if you're not going to succeed at that if that's not a good skill that you have. So like, even just that part of it, irrelevant of the material, and irrelevant of how smart you are, just literally sitting in a room and hearing 35 people typing on their keyboards for 3 hours straight is very stressful, and no different than the stress you would have experienced in writing the LSAT or the MCAT or the GMAT. So I do think that like there's something to it, and again, there's cognitive abilities and some, you know, memory recall, and like some of the things there's obviously some science behind the testing, but it's sad that it's become sort of the be all and end all of who can get in and who can't get in. And people specifically study just so they can do well on these tests so that they can get into the better school, et cetera, right? I think that's where the disconnect has become.
Sherston, what about yourself?
I definitely agree. I think that point about making it a business is where I was like, that's it, man. Like, just because I almost view it in a backwards, right? Like, and I can only speak to the CPA or the accounting route. I can't speak to all the other standardized tests that you did, but it's kind of like, if I feel like it makes more sense to understand what you're doing and then go back and learn kind of those details. And maybe a lot of people will disagree with that, but to me, it was kind of like, when you're forced to study all these things at once, it's kind of like, what am I doing this for? Or like, what do these things mean? Like, I need to visually or like practically see it in work before I understand it. And maybe that's just the way I learned. So for me, it was kind of like, when I was working in accounting and stuff like that, I learned way more than what I did in school. And I was like, I would go back to my schooling notes and things like that. And I'd be like, oh, wow, okay, yeah. Like, I get where I was having trouble with this before, but now this is so much easier that I've seen it in play, right?
Right.
So I'm definitely against all forms of schooling, but I'm biased.
You know what, though? It honestly, and this is the crazy part, is like, you always hear this, but you don't really understand it until later in life, is like, so much of it depends on your teachers, whether it's professors in schools, med schools, law schools, whatever, or even your high school teachers, right? Like, or your elementary teachers, like the ones that kind of lay it out for you and help you understand, why do you need to know, you know, this algebra ever? Like, who's doing algebra equations ever in their life? Like,
right.
Maybe if you're an engineer, I don't know, but like, most people aren't doing them. But it's not about that, right? It's about understanding how to like think of concepts and like put them in life. And so, but again, it's kind of hard to explain to a kid in high school, but also even more practically speaking, like even in law school, like taking whatever, a tax law, these courses, like they're in a book, they don't mean anything until you get to the real world and they actually start to mean something. And you're like, oh, now I understand why this and this has to happen, right? Like,
exactly.
But if you have the right teachers and or the right professors, or you're asking the right questions, or you're having the right discussions in the classroom setting, I think that is what makes or breaks it for you, right? The part that I've always been upset about school, despite the fact that I spent 10 years at school, is how much universities focus on professors that do research. They only care about research and how much research they do and how many papers they publish, because that, you know, that gives them notoriety and all this other stuff. And honestly, it's like, it's sad, because I always tell the story. In undergrad, I went to Guelph, and like I was doing sciences, so I took an organic chemistry class, and there was a teacher that I taught it for years, and I think they retired or they left the school, whatever happened, and they brought in this like teacher from France. And she said on the first day, like, she's like, my English is bad and I hate teaching. I've come here to do like really interesting research, but they forced me to teach a class. So like, here I am on like day one of class. And everyone in the class is like, WTF? Like, what are you talking about? So, and it was like the word, like, who wants to go to a class like that, right?
Great first impression.
Yeah, terrible.
How often did you skip that class?
Yeah, even if that was true, why would you admit that?
Right.
And guess what? She was a terrible teacher. Like, everyone did, no one understood the class. Like, and she tried to play it off because she was French and there was an English barrier, but it wasn't true. Her English was fine. Like, she wasn't passionate for it, right? And when you're like at the university level, and this is the problem, like university level is when you need to actually learn the education part of it, because that may be the thing that you want to do. If you don't have the teachers that are inspiring you or teaching you the things, you're like, you're bored, you're not interested, whatever, you're easily going to be dissuaded by it. And so, and that's even more true once you get into professional school, right? There's legal professors that are legal scholars and they're super smart and they know the law inside and out, but they're not good at teaching. Mm-hmm. And so you lose that like interest, and then you get, and then you become a lawyer and you're working and you're like, oh, I wish I actually had someone to teach me these skills. And the thing, and I always go back to like the profs for me for law school, like the profs that, and if you ask anyone who went to my law school, like at Osgoode, they all say the profs that they love the most are the ones that actually, practiced for a bit, or even whether they did or didn't is irrelevant, but the fact they can teach like, and ground it in real life experiences and like teach you the principles, because they know you're never going to remember the case law. No one remembers that crap. You remember, a little bit of it, but that's not what is important for you later in life. It's like understanding the principles and why this works and why this doesn't work and how society has gotten to this place, right? Mm-hmm. That's exactly. That's what's interesting. So I think the one place that actually Canada or any country needs to do a better job at is sadly at the teacher level, right? And I'm not blaming teachers, like it is what it is, but I think they need to like rethink about how they hire teachers and professors, and you need to have them research and all that, and that's important. But then maybe those people shouldn't be the ones that are also teaching the classes, right?
Just to that point, I think I think especially with everything going on now, like schooling is in the forefront because everything is moving virtual and things like that. So it's kind of like there's a big spotlight on it to be like, hey, there's a lot of room for improvement that we've been ignoring all this time, right? So
totally.
But
I don't even know how, like, obviously I have 2 young kids at home. So like their teachers did some Zoom classes and actually they were great. But, I've spoken to so many friends, literally across the globe who have kids at different ages or themselves are still finishing up school or whatever. And like, it's just sad. Like everyone's experiences have been so different over the last few months. And again, it comes down to the teacher. Are they comfortable getting on a Zoom call in front of their class and teaching? Does the school even have the right resources? Do the kids have the right resources? Like there's so much to it, and it'll be interesting to see like how this area evolves, right? Like we're on a Zoom call right now. People forgot about Zoom 6 months ago. Company was on its last legs kind of thing. So we'll see, man. We'll see kind of where and how teaching evolves. And I think as a society, like young people are getting more frustrated by school in general. Like, I think that is a very, North American and probably European mindset where like school, I think unless you want to be a professional, like if you want to be a lawyer, or a doctor or whatever, accountant or engineer, nurse or et cetera, I think young people in general are like, why do I have to go do a 4-year degree? What is this teaching me? Why do I have to go, learn about whatever? What is my poli-sci degree even getting me? What are any of these degrees even getting me? Like, what is an undergrad in science even getting me unless I'm choosing that route? Like, it is a bit of a problem. And I think institutions as a whole really haven't figured it out. I think the ones that probably will succeed are the ones that are starting to realize that, yes, I have to teach you Bio 101, but if I don't teach you about how this eventually becomes molecules in medicine in a pharma industry, or why doctors need to know this stuff, like there's no link. Right. And they're just reteaching the same syllabus over and over and over again. And they're really lacking that like linkage. And I think, and now I can get a YouTube teacher to teach me, right? I can watch like 10 videos about photosynthesis and learn it. I don't need to pay the school, whatever, hundreds of, thousands of dollars or whatever it costs to go. So I think like our generation probably, we've kind of gone through it and our parents are okay with it, but like, look at me, I'm having these thoughts and I have young kids. What's going to happen in, however many years from now when they're applying to school, if they don't want to be this type of professional, like our parents kind of pushed us into school, I think, like this generation of people, but I don't know that that's going to continue to happen because our generation maybe didn't have the best experiences from school or didn't get the outcome that we thought school was going to bring us to, right?
Right, exactly. And I like that. I feel like 2020 is kind of like the year of drastic reform. It's kind of like so many of these institutions and so many, like whether that's school or that's work or anything, it's kind of like
politics.
Yeah, everything's getting thrown upside down, and it's kind of like, what are you going to do about it, right? How are you adapting to that? So I think schooling is definitely one. But from your experience, like in the legal sphere, like what kind of, with the economy and just kind of from your background, what kind of differences are you seeing right now in terms of the result of these changes? You know what I mean? Whether that's generational changes, kind of preferences changing, as well as like the situation that we're in, the pandemic kind of switching everyone off, right?
Yeah. Well, it's so hard to tell, right? Like and I think different countries and how they've dealt with the pandemic and how their society and economies, rebound and all that. I think so much of that is going to be dependent on the grander, scale.
Right.
But I do think the companies that will succeed, obviously, are the ones that are able to adapt and shift to digital and do all those things.
Right.
I think from like a career perspective, if I had just finished law school today and all of a sudden my articling position that I thought I had is no longer there, or I can't get one, it was already hard to get one without a pandemic. Now there's a pandemic, and the whole system kind of relies on the big firms and the medium-sized firms to hire a bunch of the students and train them and make them professionals. And, and it'll be really like, they're going to have to take a hard look at themselves to figure out like how they continue to do this. Right. And it's not because, whatever, the industry doesn't want to support young lawyers and young students. Like I think they do, and maybe even more than ever, but they'll just be like real financial considerations to what that actually means. And like they were already kind of struggling, right? Like in the legal industry, at least, like there's already so many students that weren't getting articling positions, and they already created like this school that was sort of like a hybrid school where you kind of did some work pro bono, but also kind of had teachers come in and teach you like lawyering skills. And that's what you did for your year of articling, where you did like sort of half and half. And then those guys, again, kind of had to, once they got called to the bar and then became lawyers, had to find their own jobs or start their own practices or whatever. I think generally humans are good at adapting. So some sort of system will come out and, people will crack the code and figure out new ways of doing it. But I think it'll be an interesting shift for sure to see how things evolve. And potentially young people like taking more risks because of necessity, either starting their own practices on their own, or, had been laid off and like need to make money. And so, figuring out what that means for them. I do think generally, like I'm in the field, so I read a lot about it. There's been surprisingly like a lot of movement where companies are like really actually hiring more lawyers now, because the legal landscape is changing like overnight every day. Like it's been the last 6 months, like any other industry, right? Like the regulations are changing so quickly, so fast, whether it's employment law or, whatever, government regulations across the board, immigration, et cetera. They're just happening so fast. And it's like almost near impossible to stay on top of how many things are changing. And so surprisingly, like there's been a lot of hiring for companies that are looking for lawyers to like help them navigate, the waters. So that's been one of the areas and I'm not saying it's across the board, and obviously there's people that are out of work and all that, and I don't want to paint the wrong picture, but I do think that's been an interesting shift where like companies before maybe would have relied on external counsel are now looking to hire people in-house with various levels of expertise, or are calling like external counsel when they can to kind of get the advice. So I think the legal industry is one that's kind of uniquely changing, and we'll see kind of whether that shift changes or stays. I think there was already kind of a move to in-house. Like I think in-house general was kind of building up more and more. So we'll see if that, even becomes an automatic starting ground for some kids. Like, companies like you to have been worked at some kind of firm and have some kind of practice before you come in, but who says that's, the right way of doing it? There's many ways of doing it. So we'll see where it goes. But I think in any industry, whether you just finished your CPA or, whether you, just finished business school, whatever, like, I think the whole economy is at one of those moments, maybe kind of like 2008 or other places in time, where I think the people that kind of say, okay, I'm going to figure out, I'm not going to let this deter me, and I'm going to figure out what's needed, and I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to make those decisions for myself, are going to just have to do it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But we'll see. I think it's a really interesting time. Like, Aman, what's happening in your world? Like, are you changing?
Yeah. So in tech, we've actually shifted a lot, obviously. So if you look at any tech company, their usual capital structure is usually a lot cash-based, and their burn rates are usually quite significant. And so you can only go as far as how long your cash takes you, right? So, and so we've seen a couple of changes in the industry. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with larger companies such as like Virtual, the food delivery app. They recently raised, I think it was 45 million, something like that. But they also laid off about, I don't know, I think it was 1/3 or something like that in terms of their entire workforce. Right. So a lot of that money, in my belief, is going towards just future run rate and kind of keeping them afloat, to keep their operations afloat. And I think a lot of startups are doing that right now. So there's been a shift in terms of also the mentality. We had a lot of tech companies just focus purely on growth, and they always forgot about the end goal of a business is to actually profit.
Make money.
And so that ideology ain't flying anymore. So we've seen the shift with a lot of businesses upcoming in the tech industry that their mentality is profit-based. So we just, on the podcast, we had Anthony Zhang, who is a serial entrepreneur. He's a great individual. We asked him the same question, and he's just like, I want to focus on profit. I mean, worrying about raising your next round of money is quite difficult. It's not an easy task. And given the stringent kind of circumstances with the pandemic, there's not a lot of money moving around, to be honest. Right. And so venture capitalists are kind of tighter in terms of who they invest in. And so that's kind of, we've seen a shift. And I think across all industries, we've seen that, the decline, the layoffs, and that's to be expected with kind of no one going out, no one buying, and, so that's made a huge impact. I mean, I'd be curious to see how, in terms of the corporate world, so Sherston, I mean, that's your end of things. So like a Rexall or any large corporate world, I think you have more experience. So can you kind of describe that? I know Yum Brands is similar to that in the sense it's a large corporation as well, different capital structures. So how do you guys kind of see your world changing?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think what we're seeing right now is it's kind of like a two-pronged approach for a lot of corporations, where it's like, on one hand, they're understanding that they're so behind in business operations itself. Like, as a result of the pandemic, it's kind of like you have a lot of traditional corporations that have that mindset of 9-to-5 office, and this is it, right? And like, you come in, you do your role, and you leave. And it's kind of like they're understanding that, okay, there's a whole new world to running our operations that we weren't aware of. Like, they always used to chalk it up to be like, oh, that's just, like simple concepts such as working from home is now the norm now, right? So I think that's one of the biggest shifts that we're seeing is seeing corporations understand how people work, because that was a very overlooked item. Like, and I hate to say it that way, but it's kind of like a lot of companies didn't truly understand how their employees want to work. And so that's the biggest thing that I'm seeing right now is they're shifting to managing their employees better and understanding their employees better. It's because at the end of the day, if they're not there, you're not making money, right?
Yeah, and you're also forced to communicate with them now. So
exactly,
you're forced to communicate, and they're sort of forced to listen, because like, that's the reality, right? It's funny, you're totally right. Like, in a weird way, all the structures of society that were originally set up, the 9-to-5, the Monday to Friday, all these things, like, they were set up for the economy at the time when they were set up, but now it's so different. For sure, the work from home, like work from anywhere, work all the time, like all these things are going to need to be rethought about and managed. And even for me personally, I've always, not always, but like in my adult life, I've been a night owl. and I do like a lot of work and some of my work in the evening time. Why does it matter that I walk into an office at 9 a.m. if I'm not productive until noon? And like, this is funny, but like I'm on this like crisis team or whatever at my office. And like when the pandemic hit in Asia, we were obviously Yum Brands was, you know, on the KFC side, at least they're everywhere. Same with Pizza Hut. And so we kind of followed it as it started in China and across the world. And we were kind of providing like support across the world. And like, you know, you're getting emails and text messages at all hours of the day and all hours of the night because you're literally supporting a global business. And I like in the morning, you know, we'd have these calls at like, or meetings at like 9 a.m. or whatever, 10 a.m. And I'd be fine. I would participate or whatever. But in the afternoon, they would always joke like, oh, Mike's had a second coffee nap. Mike's had a third coffee nap, right? And that's kind of when my brain like really turns on and when I'm really firing. And that's when and I know that about myself. So I actually plan like that if I have really important meetings, like even like this one, like if I want to really be vocal, I'm going to actually do it later in the day. Like that's when my brain works the best. Why does it matter that I walk into an office at 9 a.m. if I'm not going to be productive until noon? And it's not that I'm not productive. Obviously I can be and I am, but you know, my peak performance, if you want to call it, is later in the day. And like the fact that companies are now realizing that, like, it's crazy that it took this to kind of happen. Right?
Thank you.
So we'll see kind of how, you know, the economy and things evolve. But I do think by virtue of this, like companies have to listen to their employees and, you know, figure out what the right dynamic is going to be.
For sure.
Totally agree with those points. So let's get back into the legal space per se.
Sure.
So you've obviously worked over like now, I think it's 8 years plus in the industry. What would you say is like the best piece of advice? I know we've had bits and pieces here through the conversation, but what would be the best piece of advice you can give the next generation of lawyers?
You know, for lawyers specifically, I think and this has always been the case, but sort of just put your head down and work hard. I think, you know, take the opportunities as they come and try and learn and try and experience new things, but really like good work. If you do the good work, that is really what gets rewarded. And I think, you know, it's easy and exciting to always think about, oh, what's my next role and what's my next gig and when is this promotion going to come? And I think this is in any industry, not only legal, but I think if you actually like dig deep and roll your sleeves up and do like the work and really put in the effort, I think it's proven over, you know, decades that really does pay off. And we talked earlier about the Ryan, you know, get rich quick schemes and whatever they are. And that may work for a very small group of people, but ultimately, you know, if you see yourself really wanting to do law as a career, you know, part of the problem is that it takes, you know, a long time to really kind of learn the law and how to deal with it and how to work with it. And you don't understand that until you've spent years doing it. And I've only spent 8 years. I mean, I still consider myself young in the industry. And, you know, you always see on TV, there's all these old gray-haired lawyers and they're really the ones that kind of are the sages and know these things. And it, particularly in law, the reason that happens potentially more than in other industries is because you really do need those years of experience to kind of live through different scenarios and challenges and deal with them and grapple with them. And, you know, you could be a good writer, right? Like that's a skill. Like some people are better writers than others, and reading and writing is part of being a good lawyer. But, you know, and you can learn that part of it, but you haven't experienced all the things you may need to kind of be good. And that's kind of why people work really hard in law and there's all these long hours, is because they, you know, it just comes down to the fact that you need to grapple with it and deal with it and write and learn and rewrite and read and all these things that need to happen for you to hone the craft. And it just can't happen any other way. So I think it kind of gets back to kind of, you know, even this podcast is called like Generation Hustle, right? And like people always think they need, like, what does hustle mean? There's sort of a negative connotation in my head with it. Like, oh, I'm hustling someone on the side, or people say they have a side hustle because they're doing something else on the side. It's like, there's nothing wrong with actually just the hustle is you just working your ass off in the thing that you want to be good at and want to succeed in, right? I think that is the true hustle. And so just kind of stick with it and really do the grind, right? I think the grind part of it is really where you learn in the trenches and how you figure things out and how you get good. And that is sort of what differentiates, in my mind at least, like, and people that are, and again, it doesn't mean if you're young you can't be good. You can, but you really have to dedicate yourself to that thing. And I think if you ask, you want to go see a doctor, you want to see a surgeon, do you want to see the guy who's doing his 7th surgery or the guy who's doing his 7,000th surgery, right? And it's just because he's renowned because he's done 7,000 surgeries, because he's seen so many different things, right? And again, the 7th guy might be super good and technical and smart and read every book and maybe memorized it and know inside and out and maybe has watched 7,000 surgeries. But until you do it themselves with your own 2 hands, it doesn't compute the same way. So I think that part will still hold true no matter what it is that we do.
It's such a great perspective. And I think regardless of what career you go into, I think that's kind of the mentality you should have. Like, whether you want to be an accountant, whether you want to be, I don't know, someone in software engineering, you kind of have to work your butt off to be in the position that you want to be in. And I think that's kind of why we brought this podcast to life, to kind of shine light of individuals that, work hard, but there's a reason to working hard. You get to a position because of that hard work, and there's always a story behind that hard work and why you're doing it. So I think that's quite unique. So you've also said that you've really enjoyed the culture at Yum Brands, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever considered kind of opening your own practice? Because we know a lot of lawyers kind of go down that route. But what has made you kind of stay at Yum Brands versus going that route?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't I've thought about it in my head, but I haven't really explored that opportunity. I think for me, and something that I personally thrive in is the relationships. And this is something that I think you don't get from working from home only, right? And back to my original point about the economy and how things go. I do think for me at least personally, I'm extroverted. I'm passionate about having conversations with people and getting to know people and having those extra things, not just, hey, can you draft this letter for me? I can draft the letter, it's not about that. It's about everything, the context and everything surrounding it. So I do think that maybe for me, at least in my career right now, I really like being part of a company. I I've succeeded in this company and it happens to be big. It doesn't necessarily need to be a big public company. It could be a smaller company or whatever, but I do like the office environment, and I do like we're all kind of pulling towards the same thing. And I think culture is super important, and all these things that happen in an office environment and how people treat each other and, all those things I do, for me at least, that's what kind of motivates me. And so I think that's why I've have enjoyed my time thus far in the company, and what has made me at least successful is I've really bought into that. And I think it's not for everyone. And I think different people succeed in different kind of organizations, and different people are motivated by different things. And some people just want to make a ton of money, and that their only goal is cash. And so, maybe, I don't know, maybe I could make more money doing my own practice. Maybe not. Maybe I don't want to take the risk of setting up my own business because I have a young family at home and I need to provide for them. You know what I mean? So there's different reasons and things that different triggers that cause someone to or not to do something. But it's not to say that one day that isn't maybe something that I would explore. And actually I have quite a few friends that are starting to do that now, and we'll see kind of how things evolve for them. And I think part of it, my parents have their own business, and I think if you know anyone that has their own business or have seen your own or run your own business, it seems glamorous from the outside, but there's so much hard work to get it running. And even part of being a lawyer with your own practice is not just about being a good lawyer. Half of it's just marketing and knowing clients and getting people and all the things that come with running a business, right? And doing your expenses and doing accounting and so I think again, it's not to say that it's not something that I may do later down the road and might get passionate about down the road or whatever, but at this point in my life and where I am with my family and et cetera, like it's not something that I've really given thought to.
For sure.
Brilliant. Yep. And
yeah, I like that. Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
And that's all right. I was just going to say, that's a great kind of like philosophy. It's like, it's the right time for something to happen. So a lot of people are, in different points in their life. And like you said, Mike, right now is kind of the opportunity, and you've really enjoyed Yum Brands. So why kind of change that right now, given the circumstances you're in? And then obviously over time, if your passion evolves, that's something you might explore.
I also haven't done like the same thing. Like I started out as like the head of legal just for Pizza Hut. And then I did both KFC and Pizza Hut, and kind of spent more time learning the KFC business. Now I'm on the international side, learning like sort of the global business, so to speak. And I'm also the head of legal for the Latin America business, which I'm like super involved in as well. So I keep doing different things. And I think that is something that you get to experience either with a company that's growing quickly or with a company that is large. There's different opportunities, right? And so for me, again, like every year and a half or 2 years, I feel like my role has changed. So I haven't really, if I had maybe been doing the exact same thing for 5 years, I probably wouldn't be that motivated by it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anyone is at any job, whether it's, whether you run your own little practice or whether you are in a company. Like I think part of it is keeping, things that are motivating you and things that are changing all the time that excite you. If you lose that passion and excitement, I think that's when it becomes the 9-to-5 dread that I think, a lot of people struggle with. And look, sometimes you stay in it because it's comfortable or you're making good money or there's no other opportunities or whatever happens, right? Life has its own circumstances. But for me, at least thus far, it's been about, a bit of a leap of faith and also seeing if that thing really is something that excites me.
I think you touched on a lot of really cool topics throughout this conversation, especially because you jump through so many different fields, and to be able to pivot through that, it requires a different kind of mentality to be able to kind of set those same goals again, right? Because a lot of people have a vision and they're like, this is what I need to do, and I'm going to take these steps. And then when it stops, it's like, okay, what am I going to do now, right? And so I feel like you have such a unique perspective on that, which is why I want to ask you like what you define as success, because a lot of people have different motivators, and whether that's cash or whether, like in your case, you were like, hey, I switched from my law firm to corporate because it worked out for your family at the time too, right? You had a daughter and things like that. So like different people have different motivators, but I think at the end of the day, everyone has some sort of idea of like, this is what I want, which may be a good or bad thing, but I want to get your take on that. Like, what do you define as success, whether that's in your life or in your career? Like, how do you define that?
Okay, first of all, I think it sounds crazy. Like in this world and the way we work now, I would say 95% of the people, I think money is part of the motivating factor. Like,
right.
To say that I left and whatever, and obviously when my daughter was born, but like, I didn't say, okay, I'm giving up all this money to not do those things. Like, I think obviously spending time with my family and all that is important. And I just felt like the balance was off at the time and wasn't really suiting like what I needed to in life. And I do think, especially for young people, I mean, ultimately it's not money. It's like the fact that, okay, I want to go on a vacation or two a year, so I need money for that. And I want to live in a house, in some city like Toronto where it's insanely expensive or not. Like, I want to be able to afford. It's more about the affordability and the value of the things that I want. And then I'm not saying I need to, drive a specific type of car. That doesn't motivate me. For some people, that's all they care about, right? And so I think it's almost like, what are the experiences or the things that you're looking for, right? I think what the problem is, no, it's not a problem actually. I think what people's hesitation are, and sort of like the thing about why do I feel like I have to go to school for all these years, is like, it doesn't feel like the reward right away is there. And so you start to jump around and you start to, and you kind of inevitably have to think about things in a different light. And And I think even part of the reason why people become entrepreneurs and why people, do startups or why people switch careers is because, often I think the original switch, if you're going to start a company, you make zero money, all of a sudden, or you switch careers and maybe you make, a few $1,000s more in this new company or whatever. But ultimately, it's not about that. I think we say it is, but I don't, yes, it's, if I get $10,000 more, maybe I can, pay a better mortgage on my house, whatever it is. I think ultimately it's what the potential is and what the, what the lifestyle and what the things that you're chasing are, right? And I think that's what it comes down to, right? And I think if I honestly, truly thought that being a car mechanic, like if I was really passionate about cars, maybe I would, and that's what I love to do, maybe I would be a car mechanic, right? And I would say, I think money is there, but it's sort of the reward that you get while you do the thing. But I think if you ask anyone who really likes what they do, you have to somehow be passionate about it. And everyone says that, and maybe you don't even know what the problem is you don't know when you're young what you're passionate about. Mm-hmm. But eventually, when you're not passionate about it, I think is probably a better way. It's one of those things where like, if it doesn't feel right and you just hate it, like you really hate it. And it could be a bunch of things. Again, it's like, is it the right company? Is it the right environment? Is it the right people? Is it all these things? But if you're ultimately, there's got to be some level of passion for it. And I think even, to be honest, like even practicing law, like I think being in a law firm, you're really a lot more, specialized, and you really need to know like the intricacies of every law and how they work and what it means for the businesses and et cetera. Just like being a tax practitioner might be, right? When you move in-house, and like why I really have enjoyed being in-house is I'm more of an advisor. Yes, I have to know how to draft the contract. Yes, I have to understand the laws that are applicable, contract law, privacy law, whatever comes up. But it's, to me, I thrive off of the actually being part of the strategy of the company and figuring out how we can get this thing to work and how we can, make it work, why we're making it work a certain way, why we're structuring the business this way, why we're trying to get this type of goal. Like that's what drives me, and I get to do that from my legal chair. And that's what's been motivating for me. And obviously the reward and money and all that, that's obviously part of the situation. But like you have to truly like what you do. Otherwise, if you don't feel passionate about it, we know where that ends.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. Don't get it twisted. I would do this all day if I could. But me and Amin are still working during the day because we got to pay the bills too, right? So
exactly.
But we're passionate about this, and which is why we started this. So I definitely agree with that.
Exactly.
But thank you, Mike. I don't know how you are for time right now. We normally do like a quick lightning round at the end. So let me know how you are doing for timing.
Let's do a quick lightning round, and then I'm going to call it.
All right.
My kids do wake up early still.
Okay, sweet. All right, so the lightning round, we just always try to get a bit more personal with our guests beyond just say their careers and the business perspective. So let's get right into it. Favorite book of all time?
Oh, man. I was going to say The Catcher in the Rye, but I don't think that's my favorite book. It's just the first thing that popped in my head.
I guess that still counts.
All right. Favorite book? Blink, maybe? I like that book.
Who's that by?
Malcolm Gladwell.
Okay. I've heard that. I think someone else said that on our podcast.
Yeah. We've had Malcolm Gladwell twice now.
So. Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell's great. Actually, I also like Freakonomics. He didn't write that book, but that's also an interesting.
Right. I thought you were going to say the LSAT prep book for a second, but
yeah, LSAT Prep 101.
Thank God it was that. So after a long day, you come back from work. How do you unwind?
I guess after I put my kids to bed.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I do enjoy a nice glass of wine. Not that I drink on a regular basis, but if that's on the table, that's a good option. Actually, to be honest, I'm right now I'm living away from my friends, so I spend a lot of time on WhatsApp or talking to buddies or my family or kind of just taking a breather from looking at emails and all that. I think that's the reality of how I unwind. Before COVID, I guess to some extent, I was playing basketball or working out. I think since I've kind of been stranded at home or in my own little community, I've been doing less of that. But yeah, I guess either talking to friends or family or doing something active is the real answer.
Awesome. So we know you work for Yum Brands. What's the favorite thing on their menu? Say like Pizza Hut, KFC, whatever it may be.
Okay.
What's your favorite thing?
In Canada, because they don't have it everywhere, it's the Taco Bell Fries Supreme.
Okay.
Globally, I think, I don't know. I love pizza a lot.
Do you get free pizza?
You get it in the office because a lot of the offices, they have like test kitchens and they're always testing different like formulas and recipes and, different suppliers. If, they want to test the new like pepper, for example, they'll do like 20 pizzas they'll pump out with like pepperoni and red pepper and like just pepper and, mushroom and pepper. Like they got to test it with all these different ingredients. So they'll bring those out at like 2:00 and like, how do you say no to like a fresh? Right. And they often have like chefs that come in and like try different, recipes and stuff. So that's a tough one for me. I also really like from KFC, I really like the chicken sandwich. So those are probably, across the board, those are probably my top 3.
Awesome. And so on the topic of pizza, and this is like the most debated question we have on the podcast.
Yes.
Yay or nay for pineapple on pizza?
Oh, I'm a yay for sure.
Okay.
All right.
We're one for like 7, literally.
1 for 7 is a yay, or 1 for 7 is a nay?
Nay.
Oh,
that's me.
Everybody loves pineapples, man. I'm with it.
Yeah, that's the demographic you're appealing to, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. But yeah, that finishes up our lightning round. So, Mike, we want to thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thanks, guys.
Super insightful in terms of obviously describing what the field of law looks like. We also got into a bit of personal talk in terms of just the life concept and how you kind of moved through your career. A very unique story. Sherston, any last thoughts here?
Yeah, no, for sure. I enjoyed this so much, and I'm forever grateful, man. I appreciate it so much. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you, man. You guys keep it up. I know you're just getting started, but I can see you're passionate about it, and it's a side hustle for now, but you never know where things go, and just keep at it. Like, you guys are doing the right thing.
Yeah, we're coming after you, Joe Rogan. Yeah, we're coming after you. Awesome.
Mike, I'm going to see if I can hold you for like 1 minute after we end this recording. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Cheers.